choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing.
What we were doing in Albany on the 40th anniversary of the JFK shooting is illustrate how Kennedy led us to the moon and then depicted in miniature with bullets why we need to do this, because of impacts. And then we drove home the point with more scenes of impacts. Some of you may notice how, years later, another documentary about Jimi Hendrix ripped off our use in 2003 of these scenes of UFOs in Washington. But here's something else that they would have ripped off if we had mentioned it in 2003, and that is, these scenes are what inspired the September 11th conspirators to crash aircraft into buildings in Washington and New York. They got the idea from this movie. The message conveyed is that humans have to get off the planet and build safe haven on the moon, a new Noah's Ark project to survive the coming asteroid disaster. My concept was echoed again by mainstream media.
NT7 could wipe out 25% of the world's population and cause major climate change, tidal waves, floods, a nuclear winter, and widespread forest fires. The strike day has been calculated as February 1, 2019.
This could be a very serious matter.
You know,
but if the degree of certitude increases up around 5, I think we ought to start looking for a lunar base. What do you think of that?
Well, I think
a lunar base. Why are you minifying the importance of this phenomenon?
In January of 2004, just a few months after my lecture tour about the moon colony safe haven, President Bush announced that he's ordered NASA to build a permanent moon base.
In 2008, we will send a series of robotic missions to the lunar surface to research and prepare for future human exploration.
That behind the scenes, they were obsessed with Joe Wilson.
Using the Crew Exploration Vehicle, we will undertake extended human missions to the moon as early as 2015, with the goal of living and working there for increasingly extended periods of time. Returning to the moon is an important step for our space program, establishing an extended human presence on the moon.
There's been a startling admission from the man in charge of America's space agency. His name is Michael Griffin, and he now says the development of the space shuttle was a mistake. NASA's chief says scrapping moon missions for the shuttle and the International Space Station was, quote, not the right path.
Let's go back. I think in the history of the human race, the moon has been the first place we've gone to that said, okay, we don't need to go back there again.
And maybe we should do it again?
Well, the questions would be why.
We turn now to NASA headquarters, where officials have unveiled a plan to build an elaborate permanent base on the moon by the year 2024.
The Rock Prophecy website timeline entry for January 14, 2004 records my assertion that Bush's moon program is really designed to save a few billionaires from the asteroid impact. In November of 2005, the story about this real purpose for the moon colony was written for a website article titled A Declaration of Dependence. That report was published online on November 6, 2005, and the next day several copies were mailed to First Century Press, where the article remains in sealed envelopes dated by the U.S. Post Office, as evidence that my website is the first media in the world to report about the moon mission being a disguised Noah's Ark project. NASA's lunar colony is designed as a safe haven escape from asteroid disaster. Our government is determined to conceal news of the asteroid threat and instead spin a made-up reason for NASA spending trillions of tax dollars on a mad dash to the moon. But Bush wasn't the only one to heed my warning to get off the planet. Microsoft legal teams studied Rock Prophecy when it arrived at the Copyright Office in 1995. They were monitoring my reports as part of their case against the Hendrix company I worked for. Within months, by 1996, their think tanks had formulated a way to get Paul Allen off the planet. In '96, Microsoft's think tanks envisioned a private spacecraft built under the veneer of a competition called the X Prize. X standing for experience, as in Jimi Hendrix Experience, and also as in Paul Allen's Experience Music Project, where Bill Gates announced the release of Microsoft's XP Experience operating system. These titles are all references to the Asteroid prophecy of Jimi Hendrix, which they were all obsessed with and pretending to not care about. In 1996, a frontman named Peter Diamandis was named to oversee the X Prize Charade.
Since the dawn of the space age, only 2 nations have actually gone to the moon, and no one's been there in over 30 years.
And so I said, what can we do to try and create a commercial space program? And allows me to go, and others to go, when I want to engage that capitalistic engine outside of the industrial military complex to get me into space and my friends. And
Paul Allen hired spacecraft designer Burt Rutan to build the escape vehicle with which the rat can flee the sinking ship. They chose to launch their spacecraft on the first anniversary of my lecture tour about the importance of returning to the moon, June 21st, 2004, exactly 1 year after they saw my presentation about the moon landings. The Rock Prophecy website timeline for June 21st, 2004 describes how Paul Allen's spacecraft is inspired by Rock Prophecy and built as an escape vehicle to get him safely to the space station before the rock hits. In fall of 2004,